BBC with Anna Ford and Andrew Harvey.
Good evening. The headlines at 6 o'clock. 35 Allied prisoners of war, including 9 Britons, are tonight in Saudi Arabia. Celebrations at Riyadh Air Base as they arrive from Baghdad on a Red Cross plane. The Prime Minister visits the troops in Kuwait. He tells them, "You've done a fabulous job. You're all folk heroes." A Paris court finds 5 Irishmen guilty of IRA gun running. And a witness in the trial of Winnie Mandela claims she beat him with a whip. A second group of 35 Allied prisoners of war left Iraq this afternoon. The group included 9 Britons. They were met at Riyadh Air Base in Saudi Arabia by the Allied commander in the Gulf, General Norman Schwarzkopf, who said every one of them was a hero. Among the freed Britons were 6 Tornado aircrew: Flight Lieutenant Adrian Nichol, Flight Lieutenant Rupert Clark, Flight Lieutenant David Stewart, Flight Lieutenant David Waddington, and Flying Officer Simon Burgess. The 6th RAF man was named as Squadron Leader Bob Ankerson. The other 3 were said to be soldiers. The Ministry of Defence said they would not be named for operational reasons. Tonight, all 9 were on their way to Cyprus to join the 3 other Britons released earlier this week. A further 8 British servicemen are still listed as missing in action. The Allied prisoners were brought from Baghdad by an aircraft chartered by the Red Cross, one of 2 that had taken nearly 300 Iraqis home earlier in the day. Our first report is from Jeremy Bowen in Baghdad, and his reports are compiled under Iraqi government restrictions.
The 35 former prisoners left for Saddam International Airport in Baghdad just after midday. Iraq says it's now released all its Allied prisoners of war. As they left, 2 planes carrying almost 300 Iraqi POWs arrived in Baghdad. The International Committee of the Red Cross, which is supervising the exchange of prisoners, says its priorities are now the release and repatriation of the unknown number of Kuwaiti civilians who are being held in Iraq, and the repatriation of the remaining Iraqi prisoners. For those still in the Iraqi army, pay rises were announced today by Baghdad Radio. The Republican Guard will get the biggest increase, 100 Iraqi dinars a month. There's been a political reshuffle here as well. The Minister of the Interior has been sacked. He's been replaced by a cousin of Saddam Hussein, a former Director General of the Security Department called Ali Hassan al-Majid. He was, until recently, the governor of Kuwait. Jeremy Bowen, BBC News, Baghdad.
There were emotional scenes at the airbase in Saudi Arabia when the former Allied prisoners of war arrived. Fergus Walsh reports.
Out of Iraq at last and back on friendly soil, their war finally over. The Allied Commander General Norman Schwarzkopf among those waiting to greet them. First off was the single Kuwaiti, back to a fervent welcome. He was followed by the 9 Saudis, also wearing the distinctive yellow prisoner of war outfits. Next came the Americans, 15 of them. Their relief was obvious. Among them, Army Major Rhonda Cornum, the 2nd woman captured by the Iraqis. Then finally came the Britons, more reserved than their coalition partners. Led by Flight Lieutenant Rupert Clark, they simply filed onto the bus for the transfer to Cyprus. But not all the Allied prisoners could walk off the plane. A few words of encouragement from the Allied commander for the most seriously injured serviceman, an American F-16 fighter pilot, who was then escorted to a transport plane which would take the Americans to Bahrain.
It's almost over.
What was your impression of the young men and women getting off the plane?
Every one of them's a hero.
How'd they look to you?
They look happy to be home, happy to be in freedom. That's the way they look.
Did any of them say anything to you?
Yeah, they all said they were glad to be here. That's what they said.
Waiting for their son to come home is the Burgess family in Grimsby. They were called yesterday with the news that Flight Lieutenant Simon Burgess was safe.
Well, it was, I can't really explain it. because one's emotions are down for so long, you can't automatically change in a matter of seconds. But it was a terrific feeling.
The Nicol family from Tyne and Wear are also one of those who've heard good news about their son Adrian, a navigator shot down on the first night of the war, who was later paraded on Iraqi television. A statement expressing their views was read out by an officer from the local RAF base.
We are naturally overjoyed. We have not yet had any contact with him, but hope to do so as soon as possible. In the midst of all our joy, we remember the families of those who are not returning to their loved ones, and extend to them our sympathy and heartfelt prayers.
The Ministry of Defence is still trying to discover the whereabouts of 8 missing British servicemen.